My daughter-in-law announced to 12 dinner guests that I no longer eat birthday cake. She said it with the voice she uses to explain things to her children. Patient, flat, already decided. We skipped the dessert this year. Mom's really been watching her sugar, and honestly, at her age, the smarter call. She smiled down the length of the table. Someone said, "Good for you." My son refilled a wine glass. I sat in the chair nearest the kitchen door and said nothing. I had baked that morning. Vanilla, 2 layers, with lemon buttercream and a ring of candied zest around the top. The same recipe my mother used every year on my birthday. The one I'd made dozens of times for church bake sales and school fundraisers and neighbors going through hard stretches. I'd set it on the kitchen counter before the guests arrived, in its carrier with the latch snapped careful. By the time Chelsea called everyone to the table, the cake was no longer there. I excused myself during the salad course. I found it in the back of the pantry, wedged behind a bag of quinoa and 2 cans of chickpeas, still in its carrier with the lid closed. The counter where I'd set it had been wiped clean. From the dining room came the sound of laughter and silverware, and my son saying something about interest rates. I pulled my cake out and set it on the kitchen counter. I found a single birthday candle in the junk drawer, the spiral kind, pink, left over from one of my grandchildren's parties, and I pressed it into the frosting. I found the long-reach lighter hanging by the stove. I lit the candle. Then I sat down alone at the kitchen table. I didn't sing. I just looked at the flame and made my wish. 73 years. I was sitting in my son's kitchen making a wish to myself while my own birthday party went on 20 feet away. I could hear Chelsea laughing at something. I could hear my son tell a story he'd told before, and the guests respond like it was new. All of them completely unaware that the woman who had spent the last 11 months cooking their dinners and folding their laundry and pretending to need help she had never asked for was sitting at the kitchen table, alone with a lit candle and a cake no one had acknowledged. When the candle burned down, I blew it out. I closed the carrier back around the cake. I went to the hook by the door and took my coat and my purse, and I left my own birthday party. My son called my name once from the dining room. That uncertain voice he uses when he can't tell whether to be worried or annoyed. The door was already shut. The drive back took 12 minutes. I kept the cake on the passenger seat and drove the speed limit and did not cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, because I had been swallowing this particular hurt for long enough that I'd started to mistake it for something normal. I still had my apartment, that was the thing. Jason had pushed me gently toward moving in with them last spring. So gently that by the time I realized I'd agreed, I couldn't name the exact moment it happened. "It makes more sense, Mom. You'll have company. Chelsea and I will be right there if anything happens." I told myself I was being practical. I kept the lease anyway, said the tenant situation was complicated. The truth was simpler. Some part of me wasn't sure, and that part turned out to be right. The apartment smelled like cedar sachet and the faint trace of vanilla from that morning's baking. I turned on the lamp, not the overhead, just the lamp, and set my cake on the table and cut myself a slice. Lemon buttercream, the way my mother made it. I ate it with a fork at my own table in my own kitchen, and I tasted every single bite. It was a good cake. My mother would have been pleased. I had a sister, Maureen, 3 years younger than me, and nothing like me except in the ways that mattered most. She married young, moved to Portland, and we talked on the phone every Thursday for 41 years without missing a single week, except for the 2 when she had her appendix out. And even then she called from the hospital the second Thursday because, she said, the silence felt wrong. She had a laugh that started small and grew until it filled whatever room she was in, and she had no patience for people who said what they didn't mean, or pretended things were fine when they weren't. She died the spring before Jason asked me to move in. A blood clot without warning, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She was out in her garden. They said she probably didn't feel it. I think about that sometimes. I hope it's true. Maureen had a daughter, Zoe, 27 now, with her mother's hands and her mother's way of saying exactly what she meant without building up to it first. She had driven 8 hours to help me pack up for storage when I moved to Jason's house. On the way out, loading the last box into the truck, she'd said quietly, "You know you don't have to do this." I'd said I know, I hadn't known. I called her the morning after my birthday. She picked up before the second ring. Happy belated. Did something happen? I told her about the cake, finding it in the pantry, sitting alone at the kitchen table while my party went on without me. The wish I'd made for myself in the dark. There was a pause. Then, okay, what do you need? That was Maureen's voice, coming out of her daughter's mouth, not sympathy. Action. What do you need? I think I need to stop being somewhere I don't belong, I said. Then let's start there, she said. I can be down this weekend. The next morning, I got in my car and drove to my bank. I hadn't been inside that branch in over a year. I'd let Jason handle things online the way he preferred. He'd added himself to my checking account for convenience, a word that had been doing a lot of work in my life lately. I brought my ID, my account numbers, and a notepad with everything written down. I was not confused. I had simply not been paying attention to my own affairs, and I intended to correct that. The woman at the desk was young and watchful, the way some people get around older women in banks, waiting to see if there was going to be uncertainty. There was none. I removed Jason as an authorized user. I reset the online login. I went through the recurring transfers line by line, a subscription I hadn't signed up for, a home maintenance fee for a house I no longer lived in, an automatic withdrawal I didn't recognize that had been quietly leaving my account for 4 months. I asked for 12 months of printed statements, and I sat in the chair by the door and read every page until I understood it. Before I left, I asked to have a flag placed on the account. Any request to add a new authorized user to be denied without in-person verification from me specifically. The teller paused. Has someone been? No, I said. I simply want to be clear about whose name is on this account. She typed, of course, it's yours. Yes, it was. I had just forgotten to act like it. Zoe came down Saturday morning with a bag of bagels and her mother's directness. We sat at my kitchen table and I laid everything out. The accounts. The car that Jason had suggested, I keep mostly for emergencies, as though I no longer had places of my own to be. The baking. The baking, she said. I told her. How I used to bake twice a week, minimum. How the church fundraisers had started using my pies as a draw. How I'd made birthday cakes for half my old street. How I'd been the person neighbors called when something hard happened because I always showed up with something made from scratch. How within 6 months of moving into Jason's house, Chelsea had started saying the kitchen was cramped, the oven ran hot, the flour made a mess that was difficult to clean up. Why didn't I just rest? And how somewhere in there I had stopped baking without noticing I'd stopped, until I baked my own birthday cake and found it in the back of a pantry. Zoe held her coffee mug and listened. Then she said, Mom used to bake too. She told me once. She stopped working something out. She said the things people try to take first are always the things that remind you who you are. I had to look at the window for a moment. The birch tree, the April sky still gray at the edges, but with something lighter coming through. She was right, I said when I could. Zoe put her hand over mine. So, what are we going to do about it? We made a list. Not a list of grievances. Just things that needed doing, written on the notepad I keep in my purse, because I have never trusted a phone with anything that actually matters. I called a lawyer that week. A steady older man with a small office above a dry cleaning shop, who had handled my husband's estate 12 years ago and still remembered my name when I walked in. I told him I wanted to revise my will and restructure how my accounts were held. He asked what had changed. I said, mostly everything. I didn't remove Jason entirely. He was still my son, and what had happened in that house, I believed, came more from passivity than cruelty. That was its own kind of problem, but a different conversation. I simply made certain that nothing bearing my name could be accessed without my explicit instruction. I updated my beneficiaries. I placed my medical decisions with Zoe, who had asked me twice what I actually wanted, and written my answers down in her own handwriting. When the paperwork was finished, I drove past Jason's house on the way home. Not to stop, just to look. The lights were on in the kitchen. Chelsea's car in the driveway. From the street, it looked like any ordinary house, and no one watching would have guessed what it had slowly been doing to the woman who lived in the guest bedroom, and never once asked for less space than she'd been given. I kept driving. Jason came first before Chelsea. He knocked on a Tuesday evening looking younger than he was. the way he always does when he doesn't know what to say. He had a foil-covered dish in both hands. "Your baking pans," he said. "You left some things." I let him in. He set the pans on the counter and stood with his hands in his jacket pockets. His father's habit from his father's body, and I noticed it the way I always did. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry about the cake." I sat down. "I believe you." I didn't know she'd moved it. "I know." I looked at him steadily. "But you didn't ask why it was gone, and you didn't notice I wasn't at the table." He was quiet. "That's fair." "Jason, when did you last ask me what I wanted? Not what I needed, what I wanted." He had no answer. I didn't push him toward one. "I'm not angry with you," I said. "I raised you to be a good man, and mostly you are. But you let someone make small decisions about my life, in small enough pieces and over long enough time, that I don't think either of you noticed what was happening. And I let it happen too, because I didn't want to seem difficult. I told myself that keeping peace was the same as having it." He sat down in the chair by the window. "I didn't mean for it to feel like that," he said. "I know. That's what makes it hard to be angry and easy to be tired." We sat for a while without talking. The neighbor's television came faint through the wall, traffic below. The sounds of an ordinary Tuesday going on around us. "Are you coming back?" he asked finally. "No," I said, "but I'm not gone." He nodded, slowly, like he was still working out what that meant. I hoped he would. I thought he might, given enough time. Chelsea came 3 days later. No dish, no offering. Just herself on the front stoop with her arms crossed, and her chin up, which I had learned was how she looked when she felt cornered. "Jason says you changed the accounts." I did. That was joint access. "It was my account," I said, keeping my voice even. "With his name added for convenience. Those are different things." She looked past me into the apartment. "If you felt unwelcome, you could have said so." I said so many times in smaller ways than this one. She didn't argue that, which told me she'd heard. "About the birthday dinner," she started. "You decided I don't eat cake. You'd mentioned cutting back on sugar. Once. 7 months ago. Because I was tired of eating cupcakes every Friday at book club." I paused. "That is not the same as telling 12 people that I don't deserve dessert at my own birthday dinner. And it is especially not the same as taking the cake I made that morning and putting it in the back of the pantry where I would have to go looking for it." Something moved across her face. Not softness. Exactly. Recognition. Maybe. The particular look of someone who has heard something accurate that they weren't prepared to hear. "I was trying to take care of you," she said. "I know. But there is a difference between taking care of someone and making their choices for them. You can do everything right and still make a person feel invisible. That is what happened to me in your house, Chelsea. Slowly enough that neither of us named it, but clearly enough that I found myself sitting alone at a kitchen table at my own birthday party, making a wish to myself." She looked at me for a long moment. "I didn't think of it as taking anything," she said. "I know. That is the hardest part to explain." She left without a resolution. The door closed, and I stood in the quiet hallway before going back inside. Some conversations don't end with understanding. They end with something more honest. Two people who finally know where they both stand. Zoe came the next weekend, and we spent 2 days making the apartment fully mine. Boxes from storage I hadn't opened in 11 months. My quilting fabric on the spare room shelves. My cookbooks lined along the kitchen windowsill. The ceramic bowl I'd made at a community workshop the year after my husband died. Uneven at the rim, glazed a blue that was nothing like what I'd intended, and exactly right for that reason. I set it on the kitchen counter where I could see it every morning. I baked that afternoon, not for anyone, just bread. Plain white, simple and patient. The apartment filled with the smell of it, and I sat by the window while it rose and thought about my mother, who always said bread was the only thing that asked for time and gave back warmth. Zoe came in from the spare room with paint chips. The landlord had said yes to the kitchen cabinets. "Sea glass," I said before she could ask. "That one." She grinned. I was going to say sage green. "I know," I said, sea glass. I went back to the community center the following week. I had stopped going when I moved in with Jason. "Too far," Chelsea said, "too hard to schedule around." By my third month with them, I'd let the membership lapse without quite admitting I'd done it. But the Thursday pottery sessions were still running. The same instructor, the same folding tables and mismatched chairs, everyone working at their own pace. The instructor recognized me. "The Raku pieces," she said. "The blue ones." I hadn't thought anyone remembered. "The kiln's free Thursday afternoons," she said. "Come back. We'll get your hands dirty again." I went back that Thursday and the Thursday after. My hands remembered before my mind did. How to center the clay, how to feel for weakness in the walls, how much pressure and how much letting go. There is discipline to it that I had forgotten I loved. The way it insists on your full attention. The way distraction shows up immediately in the work and you have to correct it before you can go further. I made a bowl, not like the one from after my husband died, all accident and grief shaped into something functional. This one was intentional. Smooth at the walls, wide at the mouth, with a small thumb-pressed groove at the rim. Something to hold things carefully. I brought it home and set it beside the old one. 2 bowls, neither of them perfect, both of them mine. Zoe asked me once, late in a long Saturday afternoon, with flour on the counter between us, what I wished I had done differently. I thought about it honestly. "I wish I'd let people see me more clearly, while I still felt like myself," I said. "The woman I was before I moved in with Jason. She knew her own mind. She baked and drove herself wherever she needed to go and went to pottery on Thursdays and didn't apologize for taking up space. I let that woman go quiet by degrees. No one forced her quiet. I did it out of gratitude, out of not wanting to seem like a burden, out of telling myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as having it." Zoe stopped working. "Those are very different things." "Yes," I said, "they are." She went back to the dough. After a moment, "You seem like her now." I pressed the rolling pin from the center out. Even pressure, the way my mother taught me. "I'm getting back to her," I said. "It's close enough." On a Thursday morning a month past my birthday, I woke before the light came fully in and made coffee and sat at my own table in my own kitchen with no one else's schedule to keep. I had a letter to write to Zoe. Not about wills or logistics or any of the arrangements I'd put in place. Just a story. The one where Maureen drove 4 hours through a January snowstorm to bring me soup the week after my husband died, because she said she couldn't stand the thought of me eating canned food while my heart was breaking. She showed up at my door with a pot still warm from her own stove and a loaf of bread she'd baked that morning. We didn't talk about grief. We ate soup and she stayed the night, and we watched old movies until 2 in the morning, and she laughed at all the same parts she always laughed at. And I laughed too, which I hadn't expected to be able to do. Zoe had never heard that story. I wanted her to have it. I wrote it by hand in the cursive I've kept careful all these years. 2 pages, front and back. I sealed it and set it by the door to mail later. Then I made breakfast. Eggs, toasted bread, half an orange, sectioned the way I like it. I ate at the table, without the television, without my phone, in the good quiet of a morning that belonged to me. Outside, the street was beginning. A neighbor walked her dog past the birch tree. The sky was the particular blue of early May, thin and clear, with everything still new in it. I thought about my birthday cake. Vanilla, lemon buttercream, 1 pink spiral candle pressed into the frosting by my own hand. The wish I'd made alone in a lit kitchen while a party went on without me. I hadn't wished for anything large. I hadn't wished for apologies or justice, or a version of my son's wife who understood what she'd done. I'd wished to feel like myself again. I looked at my 2 unmatched bowls on the counter, my cookbooks in the window, the sea glass cabinets drying to their final coat. Thursday pottery in 2 days, and Zoe's number by heart, and my own name the only one on every account. I thought about the woman who had pressed a birthday candle into her own cake and sat alone with the flame and made her wish, and then, finally, acted on it. She had been knowing what she needed for a long time. She was just finally done, waiting for someone to give her permission. I cleared my plate, washed it, set it in the rack to dry. The morning was young. I had things to do. Every single one of them was mine to decide.